Rudy, let's start off with day three on the campaign trail. This issue of security clearance for Pierre Poilievre is back in the news. So let's start with that. Is this going to be something hanging over him now based on the new reports suggesting China tried to interfere in that last election?
You mean India?
I'm sorry, India. Sorry.
Yes. I don't think so, because it was an old story that basically resurfaced. Pierre Poilievre addressed it today, saying that he won fair and square, and it is true. I mean, he won over, the vote was 68%. And even when there was the inquiry on the Hague Commission, also it was mentioned, but not that it was a risk or anything. So yes, for sure, the opposition, the Liberals, it's an opportunity for them, for Mark Carney, which he did this morning, and other opposition leaders to say that Pierre Poilievre doesn't have his security clearance and didn't want to have his security clearance. But when you look at the fact, it wouldn't have changed anything, because he was running to become leader. He wasn't leader, so at the time, he wouldn't have had a security clearance at that time, and it didn't affect the results of the race, because, as I just said, he won with over 68%.
So one thing we did hear today, which I think some analysts are describing as something we had not heard specifically before, at least from Pierre Poilievre, was this idea that among all the cuts that were going to happen, people were worried, well, Dentacare, Pharmacare, Childcare, that would obviously have to suffer. I believe he came out today and said that is not necessarily the way it would have to be. Am I right?
Yes. Look, it's all a question of where you're going to cut. When you look at the number of civil servants, I think the number was more than 100,000 since 2015, more civil servants. When you look at the cost of consultants in the public service, I believe it's more than $20 billion more of cost when it comes to consultant fees. So those are, for example, just today, yesterday, Pierre Poilievre announced that he would lower the tax and it will cost about $14 billion. You see that by just cutting $20 billion with consultants, it is more. But look, it is an issue, I believe, for the Conservative and for the Liberal, and it's just the problem of announcing every day some proposals without having the full costed platform. It's always the same thing. We have to wait till, I believe, the last week or 2 weeks before votes to have the full costing of the platform and to be able to judge. For the moment, everybody is basically throwing numbers the same way the Liberals, the NDP, and the Conservatives are throwing numbers. But at the end of the day, we don't know what's going to be the final deficit and what are they going to cut.
So let me ask, with respect to what we heard from the Liberals today, from Mark Carney, this idea of military spending, the Canadian Navy getting more money, and I think the phrase was rebuild, reinvest, and rearm the Canadian military, but there were no dollar figures attached to that. So what did you hear there that struck you as different? Because I had someone on from RMC earlier on today suggesting, you know what, the Liberals basically for the last 10 years did nothing to bolster the military, and all of a sudden this is happening. So do we make much of this?
No, because it's the same continuation of the shipyard that have been awarded contracts in the past, for example, under the Harper government. So this is, as you know, it takes 10, 15 years to build those ships. So it's just a continuation. I believe today was more of a photo op just to kind of neutralize the fact that, as your former analyst said, there was not much investment in the military. But today was a bad day for Mark Carney, and I believe it's just breaking news. He was asked specifically on Nathalie Provost. Who is Nathalie Provost? Nathalie Provost is a survivor of Polytechnique, of the shooting at Polytechnique, and is also a Liberal candidate. But instead of calling her Nathalie Provost, he did a mistake on her family name, which obviously everybody can understand. But instead of saying a survivor of Polytechnique, he basically said a survivor of Concordia. So as you can imagine, There's a lot of news going out of it. This morning, he also made a mistake when he was talking about Sean Fraser, another mistake about he wanted to say House of Commons. He said Chamber of Commerce.
Rudy, with all due respect, these are mistakes. They're not grave errors, so to speak. Why are we even bringing this up?
Because if you're from Quebec, if you know anything about Quebec and Quebec politics, everybody knows what happened in December, and that the strategy was about women getting killed in Polytechnique, not Concordia. Okay. And I'm not talking about confusing Dawson, what happened at Dawson with Polytechnique. I'm talking about him saying that they have a great candidate, which is a survivor, and mistaking Polytechnique for Concordia. Everybody who knows what happened in Quebec knows it's Polytechnique. So it's not only, and I was going to say, Yes, he has problem with French, and that's a big issue. But it's not only French. He has a lack of culture when it comes to Quebec.
Okay, I will let that go. Again, I understand these kinds of things are going to happen on the campaign trail. You make a mistake in the case of Polytechnique. That's a given for us. Maybe for someone who doesn't live here or hasn't lived here, that's okay, but whatever. We'll let that go. Talk to me about the rest of what happened on the campaign today. First of all, with respect, and just to get your take on this, the NDP slowly but surely is fading from this race. Is this the end for the NDP as far as you're concerned?
Yes, because last time we spoke, I was talking to you about the fact that the NDP was about 9%, and honestly, I thought it cannot go lower than that. And yesterday, there was a Léger poll that shows that now the NDP is at 6%. So they lost more than 3% in a week. That means that's why also you can explain why the Liberals are so high. But yes, the NDP is really, really in deep trouble, especially at 6%. I mean, I don't know what else they can do right now because this is very, very difficult for them. No one believed that they would go under 10%. Don't forget that just before in autumn, they were at 15, 20%. Don't forget what happened with Thomas Mulcair, Jack Layton. I mean, they only have one MP in Quebec, and that we know. But in the rest of Canada, they're supposed to be strong in Ontario. They are holding seats in British Columbia. But right now, you're looking at maybe a handful of member of parliament getting elected under the NDP.
You know, it's funny. I said the campaign kicked off a couple of days ago. First day, we have tax stories brought up, cuts by the Conservatives, cuts by the Liberals. Here we are, second day. Certainly no shortage of news. You kind of wonder how this is going to go from here on in. We still have 34 days to go.
Yes. So the NDP needs to show some strength, especially the problem is that this race is about the Liberals and the Conservative. There's not a lot of space for the Bloc Québécois, and you can see also in the polls that the Bloc is not very high, around 22, 23%. And there's no space for Jagmeet Singh. Look, everything is about what's happening in the U.S., tariffs in the U.S., and you don't see a space for candidates who people know that they won't form government, they won't be prime minister. So all the attention is between the Liberals and the Conservative. But it means that it's also helping the Liberals because when you have the NDP, which is so weak, all the votes go to the Liberals.
You talked about mistakes that Mark Carney made. I wonder what you think of this whole TVA situation. That debate has now been canceled, but this whole idea of him deciding not to go after he said he would go, do you think that sort of lingers? Does that stick around for a while or not?
I don't think it's going to stick around for a while, but I do believe that it's a mistake, and I'm not the only one thinking that. Tom Mulcair just put out a piece in CTV News saying that it was a big mistake for Mark Carney not to accept this debate. I do believe that it's a safer bet for him because I've prepared some leaders for that debate, and I can tell you that the TVA debate is not the same as the other debate with all the media, just because it's a face-off, and it takes a lot more skills, and you have to be a lot more agile in French to being able to compete in that debate. So I do believe that was a strategic move. They did say, it's because Elizabeth May from the Green Party wasn't invited, but at the same time, one of his ministers this morning, Jean-Yves Duclos in Quebec, said that it was because of the fee, the famous $75,000. So even the Liberal Party, you don't know exactly what is their current explanation, but I do believe that it's going to be a mistake because some people are still going to doubt his French, but it's still very, very early on in the campaign, so people will likely forget it.
All right, there you go. Rudy Husny. Rudy, thank you so much.
Thank you.